Welcome to Exhibition. And hello, Paul Higgs.
Thank you for finding me in my studio, Richard. Brilliant.
Well, it's great to be in your studio, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But your exhibition is Material Energy at Defiance Gallery in Sydney, and it's a powerful body of work. But you mentioned you're there in your studio. Great to see you. And I've been fortunate over the years to be able to visit you in your studio and see you at work from time to time.
Yeah.
So give us a sense, take us into your studio straight away and give us a sense of the sort of materials that you have and that you utilise in these works in this exhibition.
So we're talking about string, which I always enjoyed Matisse using. That really surprised me. What's that string doing in there? And I think that would have been a trigger. And so it just became natural over the last 12 years of exploring this world, because don't forget my love is oil painting until I shifted. But yeah, string, mesh, wooden sticks, Venetian blinds, balsa wood, which is so fantastic because it's so light. And of course, if you're sticking things to a surface, if you're not careful, you just have this extraordinary conglomeration of heavy things, or the picture looks like a Christmas tree with tinsel and feathers on it. So somehow the materials have to become part of the two-dimensional space.
You use the term paint constructions to describe the works. And as you said, you were in your earlier practice an oil painter, and there's still a lot of paint in these works.
Yes. Yes.
But it's also apparent that there are many other materials on the surface. How did that term paint constructions come to be, and why is that the right one for you?
Oh, well, yeah, well, Rauschenberg had the problem of his work become, is it a painting or is it sculpture? And he gave up and called them constructs. And it just suited me to put the word paint constructs in front of that. And that made me somehow understand what I was doing. I was constructing with paint itself, which to me is object subject. It's a physical thing. Even one brush mark, if you like, has a dimension. You probably have to go down to the quantum level to see it. But when you're searching for meaning and you're not a straightforward figurative painter, then somehow a physical mark is a thing, but particularly if a brush mark is very thick and it's dragged across some blue mesh, it hangs there rather than being part of a pictorial surface. So it very much looks like a spider on a web. It's a thing, but it's paint.
How, with all of that intensity of information in front of the viewer, how do you want the viewer of your works to start trying to read those works?
That's a very good question. They would have to slow down because the initial impact for me is this: does this work? Is it actually, with all of this on the surface, does it finally come to a kind of rest mass? I think this exhibition achieves that. So I would hopefully want a viewer to stand in front of it and be somewhat overwhelmed, but the more you sit back in Defiance Gallery with the chairs that are there upstairs, people have been telling me that really facilitates gradually the work settles down and they actually see the internal structure and not this pandemonium. That would be very important to me. But I would hope people do get the joyous excitement going on and the mischief and the surprise. That's very important to me if people don't expect these materials to come together in the way they have.
You mentioned Rauschenberg as somebody who had influenced the construct, the constructions to some extent, or an understanding of those. But the Australian painter Ron Lambert was also a mentor and an influence for you, and yet he was dealing entirely with paint. Do you feel as though you've stepped away from his world?
Yes, but it's a to and fro thing in the mind. He was the veteran gouger of oil paint according to one review I read a long time ago. Of course, he lived up the road from me, so it became a fabulous time for me for 15 years to find my mentor lived four houses away. Look, you take on influences and you learn to go through them, but they never go away. I can quote all the influences in my work. Hopefully the mix of things has made it original.
How would you say that that the works have evolved over the years? In what sort of direction, and what are the sort of things that they have become more rather than less?
I would say that I've been able to find a way of getting a better balance between the sensuous, the chaos, and the actual space that allows a viewer to breathe. And I'm finding ways of settling all of this energy down. So as I've played with paper, which gives me ways of moving and changing things, and the storm can be left brewing, and yet I can fiddle around with little things. If that was in oil paint, there would only be about 3 or 4 days of trying to scrape on and scrape off and to shift things. But I seem to have a greater ability to manipulate and fiddle around with bits of paper and elements that I can hold in my hand. I can actually hold a piece of yellow in my hand and cut it. And that physical connection to my mind somehow makes me place it and think about it more rather than scraping and gouging oil paint.
Let's go to one or two of the specific works in this exhibition, and a number of them actually are related to the Giza Plateau from visits of yours to Egypt.
Oh, the Egyptian hieroglyphics, getting to the Valley of the Kings, looking at Tutankhamun tombs or Ramesses. It changed my whole attitude to sort of Western art and perspective, and throw that away. Even I was listening to David Hockney, who was saying that he loves space and perspective is a complete stranglehold on space. I was listening to that the other night. So it really opened up the idea of symbols and marks and signs and codes and ciphers to play with in my work, and something that was 5,000 years ago, and it just changed everything. And I've been 3 times.
It has been suggested that some of the works in that Giza Plateau series can be described as landscapes. Now, how does that sit with you?
It sits perfectly well, because there's definitely a simple receding plane with an horizon. And why not? Sometimes you say to yourself, do I have to make life so complicated? Why can't we just have diminishing Egyptian objects moving to an horizon? But then there's still a weaving of the surface and gouache and paint, which hopefully gets it past a Fred Williams landscape, because that was on my mind, because there's only one work which really touches on that. Although there's more is sort of Islamic circular squiggles as a pattern, as a texture across the surface. I don't think you'll find that in any landscape. So it's still kind of mixed up with a fascination of radiance and energy rather than a landscape. But yes, I've used that as a device for sure.
And you also take us right under the surface into the underworld and the darkness. Yeah. Take us there for a moment.
I think it's just a lovely opportunity to play with the Giza Plateau in daytime, and yet to think there are all these mysterious things that are actually happening in the underworld and floating along below the surface of the landscape. Not for necessarily something disturbing and menacing, but something brooding, something else going on below the surface. So it connects to how one is making collage, and you're dealing with layering and what lies beneath. I just think it's just triggers to try and get myself more excited with the possibilities of the landscape. So the underworld was something to inject along the bottom of the picture. Something I've never done before. Think of the geology of the landscape or something below.
It's also very important to say that in many ways this exhibition is a tribute to your partner Rosalba, Rose. And the opening of this exhibition was almost exactly a year after her death. And some of the works in this exhibition are very specifically linked to her. There is one actually entitled Rosalba and Paul. Can you take us to that work first of all, and then we'll talk a little more generally about her influence?
Yes. Well, that work used to be called Hurstville Platform Wall, and I changed it to Paul and Rose simply because the word Rosalba and Paul is across the top of the picture.
Yes.
So I almost at the end have to actually signify the importance of that and retitling the picture. For sure, as a year after Rose's death, when I was I had all the work ready in June of this year, and she died in August the year before, and the work was ready to go, but because of the COVID-19 and the exhibition was cancelled, I started to really push and play with the work more. So I found it important to find another way back into the work by actually writing little messages and signs in the work. Even standing on Hurstville Platform Wall, coming home and looking at it, I could see number 1 and 2, and I thought, oh yes, me and you, 1 and 2, or the wall looked like the Underworld. It was so dark and dusty. But then I love billboards and peeling and crumbling things. So all these things were going on, but I enjoyed certainly putting coded writing into the work. But that's kind of a visual trigger to get yourself back into the energy of the work that had been sort of put aside because of the COVID-19. And it actually helped me take the work further. I even added long horizontal strips across the top of 3 works, so I could literally write something in and then kind of rub it out. And those horizontal strips were also signifiers to the landscape, the horizontal escarpment over this to my right. So it's interesting how you use all of these things precisely to set up conversations with the painting and trying to reconcile one's chaotic thoughts, but ways of just taking more risks with the painting and seeing if that can work, or will it turn into some sort of sentimental work about the loss of somebody, but then objectivity has to kick in. So
Rose had a very fine visual sensibility, very fine creative sensibility herself.
yes.
And as you say, many of these works, or this exhibition as a whole, forms a tribute to her. But how, in fact, do you feel that she influenced the nature of this work?
Handing me fabrics. Actually, when we came back from Egypt quite a number of years ago, I accidentally put the kaftans in the washing machine. And that was not a very nice thing to do. But then I was able to use those materials in a collage, which worked. And so I felt a lot better when I turned it into something positive. But how did Rose? She was always making and working with fabrics, and just had an exquisite eye for relationships of pattern and color, discordant color, harmonious color, and also fine detail. And if Rose looked at a work of mine, she would always look at it and think, you know, you just need a few little activators or a few little accents there. And that was the sort of microscopic eye that I valued so much. It was really, really quite lovely to have somebody with that amount of perception to nature, to flowers, and to start checking your painting out to see if it had a sensitivity as well as a robustness. Could
we go to 1 or 2 other specific works with intriguing titles, but I suspect very, very specific references. And I want to go first of all to Dogman, which I think does refer to those fellows who used to hang on the end of cranes on building sites in days gone by. Is that right?
That's right. It's always such a relief when you actually look at something you've painted and you can actually start to see something, a narrative or a story. You know, it's just such a relief. So when I saw a swinging pendulum, I thought, well, is that a musical pendulum? And then I thought, oh no, it's a wrecking ball swinging on the end of a crane. And then I deliberately put a little tiny figure sitting on a ledge, lying on a ledge on the left-hand side. And I smiled and I thought, that guy's gone to sleep and has not really done an OH&S check on that wrecking ball swinging on the right-hand side of the picture. So it's always a relief when a work starts to break into something where you can play around with the figurative, and yet the tension and the space in the picture is entirely relating to itself and not the real world.
Another work with an intriguing title, and it is Tears, Here Endeth the Lesson. Now, Dave Tier is a fine sculptor and artist at
Dogman. He is a fine sculptor, yes.
But what's the reference in this work?
Well, you do make me laugh because that, as Ron Lambert would say, I was tickled pink when David came into my studio, which he does, not so frequently now. And of course, I've loved being with Defiance because I've been involved with sculptors. They'll talk about the mass and the weight and the asymmetrical balance, and there's some heavy breathing going on. There's strength there. And so David would always come into this studio, and still will, when I can get him here, when I need a rescue mission. And he'll just look at a picture and I'm struggling with it. And in that one painting, he picked up one element off my floor and said, I think you need this here, Paul. And of course, David has this ability has the Midas touch. And it's frightening to see, I just cursed him. And I said, get out. And he just turned around and said, here endeth the lesson, Paul.
Ah, perfect. And what a wonderful collaboration.
It's just the luck of the day. Somebody can knock on your door in the studio and make you stop working on something and you turn around. But David always turns up at the right time.
Another work with an intriguing title, Naughty Boy.
Oh, no, don't ask me that.
I just did. You're going to have to share.
I think there's an Italian expression called Catebo, which means naughty boy. And Rosie's family, I was always called a Catebo because I would be playing with the kids. There's a family of 9 children and all their children. So but I do think of myself in this studio as a mischievous, naughty boy trying to, first of all, wreck things and spoil things and mess things up, and then fight for order within that chaos. So that painting I called because it looks like a room where a naughty boy has pulled all the clothes and the toys on the floor and they're in real trouble. And it's a self-portrait, I confess.
You have taught for many years at the National Art School. How much does that dynamic of the teaching learning process have great importance for you in your own practice?
Yeah, great question. It's tremendous importance. The spark of being there when a student makes a breakthrough in a work, and you can see that was the progenitor of something, whether they go on to be a painter or not. You're right there when you can actually say, my God, you're finding something personal there. And that's the kind of hope you want.
I'd like to finish with a final work, and in fact, it's the work on the wall behind you, which is in the exhibition catalogue with the title You and Me. But clearly, at the moment, it's there on your studio wall, but not in the gallery.
That's right. It's the one that got away. It became technically too difficult to transport it because all of the collage elements, which you can't see, are actually floating and hung on horizontal string lines. They're not glued flat. So the work really is a precursor to probably an installational work, which couldn't be taken up to the gallery. I wish it could have done, but it didn't happen.
maybe next time. But certainly a fascinating process. And Paul Higgs, thank you for sharing your process and your energy and this wonderful exhibition. Many thanks.
Thank you.